I didn't realize I'm with, like, former government ministers. I'm going to behave. Nice to be here. Hello, Riga. I spend my time traveling to meet the startups trying to build the future, the investors betting a lot of money on trends, the research labs, Microsoft Research, MIT Media Lab, where they're trying to understand where human behavior is going. And I'm going to share with you some of the things I'm seeing on my travels. And I guess the key message I'm getting is things are moving more and more quickly. And that means whatever kind of business you're in, whether it's an accounting business, a commerce business, a media business, you can't relax. And I see a lot. In the last week, I've been in Tel Aviv and I've been in Lisbon, and I keep getting surprised by how quickly my own expectations are no longer valid. I thought I understood what drones were. You know, now a drone is a 200 euro device you can fly with a camera. And then a couple of weeks ago at the Consumer Electronics Fair in Las Vegas, a Chinese company called Ahang launches a new kind of drone. And this drone carries a person.
We have the application designed for EHang 184. After setting up the flight plan with a single click, user can take off on any location, sit, relax, and enjoy the flight.
Are you ready to travel to work on this? I'm going to still use the tram.
Keep in mind,
this is not the future, this is now. Amazon is already testing getting goods to people the last mile. It's very sophisticated, just needs regulators saying yes. So 10 years ago, if we were talking about a drone, it would have been like a $10 million military device. Now it's something that you can use to take selfies, dronies. This guy, Alex Chacon, has a YouTube channel with thousands of subscribers. He goes around the world taking drone portraits of wherever he is. It's kind of the definitive kind of narcissism. He must have, Alex, a hard time getting a date because the girl knows he's not going to be looking at her, he's going to be looking up there. And that's just drones. Think about what's happening in robotics and artificial intelligence. Think about the experience the first time you're in a completely autonomous car.
Oh my gosh, this is so... I'm not touching it at all, and it's driving... Whoa, the lanes are getting a little... Oh, no, there it goes.
So this is a Tesla that downloaded the software by itself overnight to become autonomous. Think of robotics. This is the company that Google owns, called Boston Dynamics, that's making, well, originally it was robots for the military. Now it's robots to replace humans in places like warehouses that humans don't want to be. They like teasing their humanoid robots. Think of the computer vision, the sensors, the immediate real-time processing. This is very, very complicated. Somebody just said, let me just say this is a robot, okay? Or what about service robots? This is a project out of the University of Singapore to replace your office receptionist.
I am a social companion. I can speak of emotions and I can recognize people. I recognize you're Nadia. Nice to meet you again today.
I didn't say everything is going to work, okay? I think your receptionist is still safe in a job, but it's happening more and more quickly. And there's often a time lag between an amazing new technology and it becoming mainstream. It took 6 or 7 years after this effective personal computer for IBM to turn it mainstream. That curve is narrowing. It took, well, 5 years after this first popular browser came out in 1993 for people to be comfortable shopping. But now we're having innovation in every corner. This astronaut in the space station last year needed a new wrench So the tool was emailed to him as an attachment and then printed in the local 3D printer. So atoms plus bits combined in transformative new ways. So I guess, what does all this mean? It means that, I'm sorry, you can't rest, you can't relax, because there's going to be accelerating innovation that's going to hit traditional business models. In California, they constantly talk about the exponential curve. You go to Singularity University, and they're obsessed with Moore's law hasn't reached its limits of physics. And they talk about the analog, the linear age, the last century. If you went for a walk of 30 paces, you'd be 30 feet away. But if you're doubling in an exponential age by 30 paces, you're 1 billion feet away, and that changes the norms before you've realized it. Stuff that used to be expensive and scarce becomes free. In 1994, when it was $1,000 per gig for computer storage, if I had said to you, let's create a business where we give away computer storage, we'll call it Dropbox, we'll become billionaires. It makes no sense. But at the right time, it's transformative to an entire industry. And it's not just happening in computer processing. This acceleration is happening in genomics. The cost of sequencing human DNA in 15 years has gone from $100 million to a few $100. That soon will be the price of a cup of coffee. That's going to mean, how does the government track citizens using a bit of saliva? What happens to really personalized healthcare? And a new technology is going to come along. Do you remember these gigantic boxes? 1983, this starts to become a bit popular with celebrities endorsing it. But what if you're the big incumbent that makes money the old way? What if you are the biggest provider of landlines in the world? So AT&T, which provided millions of miles of copper cable to American homes, and they'd done some of the IP to allow mobile telephony through their Bell Labs. They didn't know whether to take this seriously, to invest in it, or to ignore it. So they called in the consultants. They called in McKinsey to say, at the end of the 20th century, in 17 years, how many mobile telephone devices do you think there will be in America? And McKinsey goes away and does its number crunching, and they come back with a number. They said, well, we think it could be fairly significant. We think there could be almost 1 million mobile telephones in America, which wasn't a bad guess. It was slightly out. And there's 3 things McKinsey got wrong that I think we all need to think about when we're talking about a technology and where it's likely to impact us. And firstly, Moore's law, form factor changes, it actually becomes more useful before we remember. Secondly, what defines whether a technology catches on is not the technology. It's not about the gigahertz, the megabits. It's about whether it solves a human need. It's whether it enhances your identity. It's whether it entertains you. It's whether it connects you emotionally to your loved ones. And thirdly, McKinsey made the mistake of framing their thinking in a very fixed 1983 way. And social norms can change radically without you realizing. In 1983, if you wanted to make a phone call, you would go back to the office or to the public call box, or you would go home. Today, if you take one of these away from a 15-year-old for more than 6 seconds, it's a human rights abuse. You will be sent to The Hague. And often it's the startups, and Riga is full of lively startups, that are testing where the world is going. And most of them don't work, but some of them do work, and they can change behavior. And startups don't have the stuff to lose that the big incumbents have, so they can try and build a business model on something that's never worked. Sometimes they're acquired, mostly they struggle, but they're inventing. You're going to hear from one of them later. And I think every successful business needs to think more like the startups, to challenge their own ways of doing things, to question every day, what is our purpose today? And I'm going to give you 10 kind of observations of how technologies are changing the rules for business and where I see risks, but also opportunities. And I guess the first one, mobile is still at the very early days. Okay, behavior has started to change, but it is still on one of those curves. This is a slide from Mary Meeker of Kleiner Perkins of American adults, how much time they're spending on digital screens from 2008 to 2015. The blue is the desktop and laptop, the green is the mobile, the yellow is other devices. But what's important is this is how many hours a day they've spent on their digital screens, from 2.7 hours a day to 5.6 hours a day. That's doubling the amount of time. That's time they're no longer spending in meetings with human beings, talking to their children, going for a walk. And that means if you have any kind of business, whether you think you're not really a mobile type of business, you need to be where that engagement is. Otherwise, you become irrelevant. For my business, media, it's been a particular threat. Somebody put a question on the chat forum Reddit 2 years ago, that if somebody from the 1950s was suddenly to come back now, what would be the hardest thing to explain to them about modern life? And there was a lovely answer, that I have a device in my pocket capable of accessing the entirety of information known to man, and I use it to look at pictures of cats and get into arguments with strangers. And I'd like to remind you that these things change human behavior. They make us irrational. And when people are irrational, they spend money in ways you hadn't really predicted. We're now so addicted to our phones that there are apps just to tell you how many times a day you're checking your apps. There are new medical conditions. This one is called the 3-dot anxiety. We've had to redraw Maslow's hierarchy of human needs because of this new world. But I think what interests me is how this is changing how both engagement but also money is going through the economy. So we've got interesting local companies trying to create value by helping us at a lower cost access mobile. But then there's bigger things happening. There are companies that we didn't think of as financial services companies that are effectively now banks. And there are people creating businesses that are doing extraordinary things. Kim Kardashian releases a game for Apple and for Android. It's a free game where you can pretend to be her, live her lifestyle. You don't have to pay money. You can pay a tiny bit of credit inside the game to move quickly. In 5 months, her mobile game earned her $43 million. So, I don't know if you study economics. This makes no logical sense to me. Jan Koum comes to America as a refugee age 16 from Ukraine, lives on welfare, gets frustrated how much it costs to phone his family back in Kiev, eventually comes up with an app that does it for free. He solves a problem that he really understands, and you know how this story ends. That's how much Facebook at the time bought WhatsApp for, when it had 450 million active monthly users. What's really interesting is to get those 500 million users, how much did Jan Koum spend in about 4 years on marketing plus advertising plus public relations? So if you can design a product that is friction-free, that just works, that's simple, your market will do your marketing for you. Although when the BBC reported the sale of WhatsApp, they said it was because Mark Zuckerberg saw it as an incredibly valuable massaging service, which to me explained the valuation in a much more effective way. At the same time, artificial intelligence is thinking in a much more effective way than us old human beings. And that's starting to hit every business sector. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I went to a pitch for lots of startups of an organization called Techstars in London, maybe 20 startups. No, it was Entrepreneur First, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Last year, they were all big data companies. This year, like 19 out of 20 said, we're deep learning, we're machine learning, we're various forms of AI, and that's the new buzzword. And, so what is machine learning? I guess Google put it on the map when it used the machine to recognize pictures of cats. It starts to learn based on its behavior. It's helping the autonomous car. This is the blind man in the Google car. The machine keeps getting smarter. But we're just, again, at the beginning. And what's interesting is there are lots of experiments to create an AI, not just on a screen, but in your neighborhood, controlled by your voice, in the case of Amazon's products. And at some stage, this will become so normal that we will rely on it. There's a London entrepreneur called Demis Hassabis who's obsessed with the big artificial intelligence challenge. Not just can you recognize pictures or get translation right. He wants to create general artificial intelligence. Can you teach the machine to respond to any stimulus like a human? He's got a company called DeepMind, which, again, has no products on the market because general artificial intelligence is going to take like 3 decades if he can make it work. So no revenue, no product. When I went to see him like 18 months ago, he was very excited. They'd finally taught the machine how to play Space Invaders. They didn't tell it what the rules were. They just said, try and get the optimum prize. The first minute, he said, first hour, it kept getting killed. Then it starts to recognize when to shoot, when to hide. And he said, we left it on all night. By the morning, it was the world's best ever Space Invader player. And then they got interested in, well, what else can we do? So Google buys this company with no revenue and no product for £400 million. And then they think, well, there's other games. You may have seen they beat the AlphaGo champion, the Go champion. This is a hard game to play, harder than chess.
But I lose all my game.
This is the European champion.
AlphaGo won 5-0, which is the first time ever a program has beaten a professional player. The way I see where we are now is that we've beaten the European champion now, and the next step for us is to try and challenge the legendary player Lee Sedol, who you can think of as the Roger Federer of Go.
He's the Roger Federer of Go, and they beat him just a few weeks ago, you may have seen. And I think what AI is doing in all sorts of sectors is creating massive advantages for the companies that have that talent, that understand what to do with the algorithm. And just as a couple of examples, Orbital Insight is a startup that takes satellite data of parking lots, of car parks at shopping centers, and it measures, and the AI compares with previous Tuesdays, previous months, and it can tell whether a retail chain is having better or worse business than previously, and it beats the markets. It sells its data to financial investors, and they know before the company has announced it. Sentient, the biggest funded AI company in the world, an American company, they're using AI to do a bunch of things. So they've got a hedge fund. They're investing against the market very successfully, they say. They're also using it in hospital context. They're measuring patient data to see if they can spot early signs of sepsis. Sepsis, a toxic blood disease. If you catch it within the first half hour, you're fine. Otherwise, there's a risk of death. They're working on that. They're also working on e-commerce. At the point of purchase, if you're buying shoes at shoes.com, they will try and optimize what will get you staying there for longer. There's a London company called Improbable that's building a machine to allow massive simulations of all sorts of data so you can create simulated worlds, which is obviously useful not just in playing games, but let's say you want to create a virtual Riga to see what happens if you shut one of the road bridges for 10 minutes, how will that affect traffic through the system? In my business, we are being replaced by algorithms. This is a company called Narrative Science that writes very basic news stories using algorithms, sports stories, finance stories. It's going to hit pretty much every sector. And you can create value. You don't have to be in a gigantic tech hub. When I was in Lisbon, I met this company that's using AI supplemented by humans to do translation into all sorts of languages. Instead of 30 cents a word, which is what the humans charge, they do it at about 3 cents a word, because the AI does a very basic translation, and then they subcontract phrases, sentences, to 40,000 people on their database who get it on their phone, and then they quickly either improve it or check it. Huge opportunities. It doesn't always, work. Sometimes it does. The MIT Media Lab released a Donald Trump Twitter bot. We're seeing a lot of bots now. They called it Deep Drumpf, and it just kind of randomly started learning how Donald Trump would speak. And to me, that actually made more sense than a lot of what Donald Trump did say. And then Microsoft. I like Microsoft a lot. I know there's a very important Microsoft boss here, and they're very good at researching AI, but they put an AI Twitter bot online a couple of weeks ago. called Tay, and it started learning what people were saying. And people were quite mischievous on Twitter, and they start getting it saying very racist things, and they took it down very quickly. But when the early part of this. And so if you add face recognition, emotion sensing, you get the ability to process information about lots of people, lots of business partners, lots of customers. My favorite use case of face recognition so far is this American company called Churchix that sells its services to churches so they can know who pretended to be in the congregation on Sunday but wasn't actually there, which I think is a really entrepreneurial way of doing this. While all this is happening, billions of little sensors are being put everywhere. The chair you're in will have sensors to know where there are free chairs. The glass of water you're drinking will know when the waiter needs to fill it up. And this is, again, at the very early part of that curve. It's going to be transformative. I was with Mark Benioff in California a couple of months ago, and he was saying he always carries a toothbrush, a Philips Sonicare toothbrush in his pocket. He's always brushing his teeth, but he always leaves it behind. And he said, I have bought maybe 100 of these Philips toothbrushes. Until now, I've had no relationship with Philips. I've bought them from Costco, and Costco knows who I am. But now Philips has put a sensor in that allows me to connect through the internet. For the first time, they have a relationship with me as a customer. And this opportunity is going to hit all sorts of businesses. We're putting sensors in our workplaces and our homes. Just think of where this is going, the amount of data being collected that is actionable data that we're happy to share with the network. On the streets, what's going to happen? The taxi gets automatic directions based on your online schedule. The sandwich shop knows you're coming near, knows, oh, this is David, he likes chicken and avocado, we'll make it in advance. Probably more important, the smartphone warns you of an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend ahead so you can cross the street. This is Cisco's vision of the connected world and how it's going to impact our lives.
That jumped on the woman who brewed the coffee.
Brew coffee.
That woke the man who was late for work.
All right, I gotta go.
And drove the car.
Driverless mode engaged.
That found the parking spot.
Find parking space.
Parking space found.
That alerted the door. That opened the control room.
Hey, Bob.
That secured the data, that directed the turbines, that powered the sprinklers, that watered the grass, that fed the cow, that made the milk, that went to the store, that reminded the man to buy the milk. It was poured by the girl who loved the cat, that drank the milk.
There's so
the Internet
much
of Everything
to unpack
is
in there.
changing.
There's, what happens to the humans that were driving the trucks.
starts
There's who
here.
controls that data. That's a whole separate talk. But in terms of what you can do as a startup, you can kind of reinvent things. I met a company in Munich called Bragi that makes this very smart in-ear headphones. Very big success on Kickstarter. Except it's not just to play music. They've put in 50 sensors. The smartphone wars have made sensors very cheap. This one tracks your heart rate, but also puts a little bit of infrared into your blood capillaries. They say they can take your oxygen levels in your blood, your heart rate variability. Again, suddenly a startup is thinking of a music listening device as a way of monitoring your health. If you have children, there is now a whole internet of babies. Smart devices like a dummy that will give the parents all sorts of data about how warm the kid is, or this is the Sproutling, an ankle band for your baby if you want to keep up with your child when you're at work. In the UK, this is what we do to convicted criminals, but now apparently it's called responsible parenting. Which leads me to, I guess, what I call the Internet of Stupid Things, which is just because the technology is easy to get access to, it's cheap, you can make products, doesn't mean you should. And I'm seeing a lot of very bad ideas turned into companies, into products. This is a company called Quirky that put sensors in a milk jug, called it the Milkmaid, and it connected it to the network so the network could send you urgent notifications if your milk at home was starting to go sour. So I presume you cancel all your meetings, you don't go on that business trip, you come home. If you're one of the people obsessed with how fresh your eggs are, good news, Quirky produced the $50 smart egg tray with LED lights to indicate, which eggs need attention, push notifications when you're running low. It may not surprise you that Quirky has gone out of business, but the fact that anybody now can do this doesn't mean that they should. Just because this Chinese hairdresser could go online and get a free online translation service to try and turn its name into English doesn't mean that hairdresser should have been allowed to do that. So a few more things that are happening. The way we engage with people is changing right now, and there's a new front line for talking to customers, and that's the notification. It started in China, WeChat, a messaging app that you can book hospital appointments, you can book airline tickets, you transact, you buy. And Facebook decided that was a good idea. We should copy it. So the reason that Facebook made you download Messenger to get messages on your mobile was because it's turning it into a platform that it hopes all sorts of companies will be using to talk to people as easily as if it's a messaging thread. It's all about getting friction out of the way. Retailers, this is Everlane, a clothes company. Hey, I need a red t-shirt. I previously bought a blue one. Do you have it? They've got your history in conversation threads. Airlines like KLM. Hey, do you have a flight to Madrid? Could you reserve me one? The message comes back with a link to your boarding card. It tells you which gate you are. This is going to be quite significant, I think. So then the question is, how do you, as a business, engage with your clients in a way that doesn't involve them going through complicated logins, waiting on the phone, even waiting for the email to come back. They've even got an AI that's trying to learn what you want. They have humans to supplement it. So that's why every app is now trying to become a messaging app. Instagram is kind of redesigning itself as a messaging app. Snapchat, which is a messaging app, is trying to be a media service among all sorts of other things. Because engagement is in the messaging apps. They are what have won the battle for space on your smartphone. So when you connect everybody on these devices, you change the nature of who's in control. And I would say we're going through one of these classic kind of Marxist revolutions in which power moves from the hierarchy to the network. It gets distributed. And what does that mean? Well, in the old days, a company would be in charge. It took 93 years for Hilton to get 650,000 rooms. It took about 4 years for these people to get, I think they have now more than 1 million rooms, and there's nobody kind of deciding. The network decides. Airbnb makes the money. Connect people, they will solve a problem that makes no sense to the old industry. BlaBlaCar, French company, connects people doing long rides between cities in Europe. They couldn't get funding at first. People thought, why would I want like a hitchhiker in my car? You just pay gas money. They've recently raised money at a $1.6 billion valuation. Because everybody is networked, it solves the problem. Crowdsourced science, solving problems, discovering planets. Who wants to have a guess at what all these companies have in common? Games company, travel company, dating company. Any guesses? So they all allow you to pay for their product with a currency that's owned by the crowd. Although Bitcoin doesn't look like this because there is no physical Bitcoin, it's a digital currency. And what's really interesting is the news is all about the volatile currency fluctuations of Bitcoin. That's not what's interesting. What's interesting is by connecting everybody without an institution being in charge, the creative talent of that crowd solves problems. You can store your land registry records in the distributed ledger, the blockchain, that it's very, very hard to fake because a copy is kept everywhere and it's almost real time. You can keep people's health records. If you're transacting, you don't have to have the bank decide to take money from you. The British government's chief scientist proposed to David Cameron in January that the government should use the blockchain to record who's entitled to welfare payments, because you can only take that welfare payment once. Smart people like Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn and a very successful investor, I said to him, why are you investing in blockchain companies? He's putting a lot of money in. He said, well, for the first time, you can make money programmable. You can add value in a way that the incumbents, the banks, the governments, the regulators never even thought of. This is going to transform everything from legal services to, I guess, medical records. We're moving from a world that's closed with a few people limiting what happens to a world where barriers have fallen away. Anybody, the 16-year-old kid in Bangkok, can come up with a product that could threaten your business. In the old days, if you wanted to make hardware, you would need the factory in Shenzhen in China. Today, as this gentleman who was on our cover showed, you just need an idea, passion, and access to Kickstarter. So this is Pebble, the watch, and Eric here went to Kickstarter. Before Apple, by about 2 years, he had a smartwatch that would talk to his device. The last version, Kickstarter put $20 million in. So he doesn't have factories. He doesn't have a huge hardware team. It's a small group of people who now have access to all of that. This is not going to just hit hardware, data storage, transport. It's going to hit every
In 2013,
sector.
there was a 47% jump in the number of home solar installations in the country.
By the end of the year, more than 400,000 American homes had solar. Don Daler introduces us to one man who uses imagination to help energize the change.
New Jersey is one of the top 5 users of solar power in the country. One company, Solar City, says they're signing up new users in 14 states at the rate of 1 every 3 minutes. An impressive figure, especially when you consider Solar City's co-founder and CEO, Lyndon Rive, has absolutely zero experience in the power industry.
I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is my third company.
A serial entrepreneur.
It is. I started my first company when I was 17, and then I started my second company when I was 22. Sold that to Dell Computers, and then I started Solar City with my brother.
Rive, this is Elon Musk's cousin, so he wasn't a solar energy person, didn't know anything about energy. He'd sold a computer company. But he came in with a new way of thinking, the outsider's way of framing things in a different way. Rather than sell people a solar panel, what if we do like the mobile phone contract? So people pay for access to their solar panels, and we tell them at the same time how much money they're saving. It's a huge hit. So just think energy, regulated, heavily incumbent-based. Outsiders are coming in now and changing it. This is a company I saw in Israel that's trying to solve the biggest problem we have in our lives, obviously, which is the battery of our phones running out before the end of the evening. They're using nanotechnology, in this case, to charge a new kind of battery in 40 seconds. This is a live demo. So again, they're not the conventional battery people. They're a bunch of physicists and mathematicians. They've now got big funding from people like Samsung, because they're thinking of a problem in a different way. So just, energy is getting very interesting. This gentleman here, who you recognize, is selling a battery storage pack for people's homes that allows you to go off the grid when you want. Again, suddenly the entrepreneur with a different way of thinking is challenging entire business models. This is a company that Google's bought, actually. They do energy kites. They go high up, they collect wind power, they send it down. Again, Google as an energy company. This is Google X, though. It's their research lab. They think about things in very different ways. They're using stratospheric level balloons to send internet access to places you can't easily get it. So just think of any industry and how startup thinking is challenging it. This is the homepage of HSBC as annotated by CB Insights. All the things that HSBC are claiming to do, mortgage loans, currency transaction, all the startups now trying to take a bit of their lunch. And, we don't have to have a bank. We could have all sorts of other conventional insurance or legal services companies. Food. We just did a story about this company in San Francisco, Hampton Creek, that's using plant-based ingredients as a substitute for egg. So they're making egg-free omelette. Cheaper than normal egg. They say healthier. It's a company now valued in the billions. So whilst thinking about how to grow your business quickly, the winners, I'm noticing, take a design-led approach to the experience and the service they're offering. So there's a whole generation who will never, ever do this again. And equally in finance, in paying for things, there's no point trying to get people to do what's convenient for the incumbent, because it doesn't work when there are companies like Stripe that make things much more easy. And there's this thing called the desire curve in design. The desire curve is the path that human beings will actually take, no matter how careful you are to try and design an experience that you think they should take. And in everything you do, in all your interactions with your staff as well as your customers, you have to work out where that desire path is, because otherwise you'll be passed by. So in a world where you touch a button and magic happens, think about how they've simplified the experience. When you get out of your Uber, you don't even need to do anything to pay. You don't even need to touch the screen. When you sign up for Uber, you don't even need to type in your credit card details. You just photograph it. It does the rest. The UK government brought in a new team of tech people, designers, to rethink our access to government services. They had an amazing success story because they thought, right, what's the simplest way somebody can renew their driving license? Book a visit to a prison for a relative. They ignored the old rules. This is how they saw things as users. These are governments relating with their citizens. So every company must be thinking, have I put any friction in somebody's way? I bought some skis last month. Just before I was about to pay, they demanded I register. How many % of people would have just abandoned that shopping cart? It's convenient for the shop, but not for me. So when I said earlier that you can't really relax, well, this year is going to be interesting because the idea that we will interact with each other on these devices may be increasingly irrelevant when suddenly these devices are hitting the market in some scale, and these are going to be very transformative. So there's a whole bunch of companies investing heavily in amazing augmented plus virtual reality. This is Microsoft's HoloLens. I call it the metaverse. Neil Stevenson wrote a book in 1992, Snow Crash, where he talked about this metaverse. Obviously, uses in gaming, very compelling, but where else is this going to go? Magic Leap is a company that's had, I think it's $1.4 billion in funding to make a device. We don't quite know what it's going to do. We know they've just put these crazy videos online with, in this case, if it will play, flying elephants. Let's try again. I'm going to try and get you the Magic Leap one. It's surreal. They put like 3 videos online like this. The product's coming later this year. Does it involve making little flying elephants with $1.4 billion? It possibly could. But no, it's another way of giving you a perception that you are somewhere where you're not. And that's going to be really transformative, both in retail. I want to buy a holiday. I want to feel what it's like on that beach. I want to buy an apartment that's not been built. I want to walk around that apartment. But also in all sorts of other industry sectors. Hyundai recently took a North Korean man who'd been in South Korea for 50 years, hadn't seen his home, on a virtual reality drive there.
평양시로 빠지는 건 아니다. 네, 이제 빠져서 구성시로
It's kind of an emotional engagement. You actually feel you're in a world where you're not. So a couple more things. I see a big opportunity here. When you connect everything, it becomes vulnerable. And this is going to be the big growth opportunity. I was talking to the former head of GCHQ in the UK, a spook, yesterday, and he's now working with a lot of businesses trying to protect their network. And he was saying, it's not a question of whether you've been hacked. It's a question of whether you know you've been hacked. And, you know, every day there are news stories of big companies. JP Morgan Chase, 76 million breaches. And I just think there's an opportunity. You've got a lot of smart people, a lot of smart universities here. This is never going to go out of fashion, developing businesses that, you know, can protect data much as law firms think they're protecting data. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of why this is an issue. In the Internet of Things, the Internet of vulnerability takes over. So this Chinese webcam that you can buy on Amazon, you may not know it, but all your images are sent back via Chinese IP addresses, so you don't know who in China is monitoring your house. There's a website that allows you to look in real time at insecure webcams. I was looking last week. You can see a baby sleeping, a Chinese classroom, and I'm not going to tell you, is this man on the bathroom? Anyway, you can, you know, makes you think. There are very smart devices connected to the Internet of Things. I don't know how many of you own this very exclusive toilet called the Sartis. It's about 4,000 euros, comes with its own apps. Very cool. You can use the app to deodorize or flush your toilet. A security consultant 18 months ago published a serious paper warning the Sartis toilet was vulnerable to hacking. If you had a business competitor, a former love rival, they could access your toilet from anywhere in the world and set it deodorizing or flushing all night. There was nothing you can do about it. I tell you this not to make you an expert in the hackable toilet, but just to make us all aware of the vulnerability. And if you are running a business, you are now the chief security officer. It's your fault. Because you can now go online and buy access to hacks as a service. You can, you know, take down a website. There are price lists up there. You can hack a girl's webcam for $1. You can hack a boy's webcam for a penny, which I think is a little unfair. And final thing I'm seeing, it's the mindset that will determine whether a company makes it. You know, at Facebook, they have posters like this on the wall. It's thinking in a very different way. Get the product out there, and then we'll see what people want. Supercell, a big games company in Helsinki, Clash of Clans, they celebrate their failures, games that aren't good enough to release, with champagne. They want to create that culture where you can take a risk, and it's fine as long as it's an informed risk. And the way you innovate in this world, there's a few ways. I'll give you a few shortcuts I'm seeing. Collisions are where different arguments, different mindsets collide. An example, this is a man called Tony Hsieh who set up or sold a big company, shoe retailer called Zappos, to Amazon for $1 billion. And he's based his team in the downtown part of Las Vegas. He creates a kind of party atmosphere in the office because he wants it to be a place where surprises happen, people collide like it's a party. But the downtown bit of Las Vegas is like 30 kilometers away from the big casinos. It's very low income, bad nutrition. He wants to create instead a kind of startup hub where creative people come. He's spending $350 million of his own money investing in real estate, in cool cafes, in startups, in theaters. And he does it because he wants to create like a new town square. He talks about the 3 Cs, a place where collisions happen, co-learning and connectedness. And I do think a place like Latvia, just as Tel Aviv has, just as Lisbon is trying, you can create the conditions where talented people from different backgrounds come in and they share knowledge. Just like at Burning Man, 70,000 people go into the Nevada desert every summer. There's no real rules. It's a cash-free economy. It's a gift economy. But they create amazing creativity. And without Burning Man, you wouldn't have the Airbnbs because it's changed the way people behave. Or you can outsource innovation. You don't have to do it inside your company. It's really sad watching big corporates try and be an innovative company. If they can't do it, GE, huge industrial company, is working with startups. This startup, Local Motors, allows people to design a crowd-designed car. They'll even 3D print it. But they've gone with Local Motors and created a workspace in St. Louis where anybody can prototype products at like 1/10 of the price and 1/5 of the time of a GE prototype. And then if GE thinks it's a cool product, they'll take it inside the company. You can distribute innovation. Lei Jun of Xiaomi, big Chinese phone company, they make their money not on the phones but on accessories. They look a bit like Apple, their phones. They've invested in 60 startups and kept them as startups because they know startups have to survive on knowing what the customer wants today. And the biggest companies making power banks, making air purifiers, are the startups that Xiaomi has invested in. They don't want the people in-house. They say if we'd had all these people in-house, we wouldn't be 8,000 people, we'd be 20,000 people, we'd be making no decisions. Disney's doing the same. It's investing in startups like Sphero, which then becomes a Star Wars toy. Or you can get your customers in certain businesses to do your innovating. Another Chinese company, OnePlus, has talk boards where the customers suggest improvements to the software. They ship new software every week. The customers wanted a bamboo case. They made one because the customers told them. Or you can get your internal team to innovate. This is a chicken fast food company in America, Chick-fil-A. This is their advertising. It's quite clever. But what's interesting about them, they have an 8,000 square meter building at HQ where everybody is expected to come and spend a couple of days a year kind of prototyping new kind of businesses, playing with virtual reality, designing the science of making the queues smaller. Last couple. Rethink where your value is in a commodifying world. Nobody here, I'm sure, would like to run a bookshop in a very expensive part of London in Mayfair. This bookshop's been there since the 1930s. Horrible business. So they thought, maybe our value is not in selling books, maybe it's in having expertise about books. So they now curate book collections for high net worth individuals. They recently did 3,000 books in a ski chalet in Switzerland for a wealthy individual. They charge £500,000. That's a more interesting way of framing a book. Or, you know, commodity product, everybody's making HD cameras. How does GoPro become the big one? Because it's not selling cameras, it's selling access to a lifestyle where you'll share your video of skiing into the avalanche. Don't try this at home, by the way. It's kind of reframing what they do. So, you know, I make a magazine. We've had to reframe our value of gathering a community of smart people. We make money from partners sponsoring dinners where we put them in touch with the people we know. Other Condé Nast magazines, well, Vogue has created a college of fashion and design. So I'm going to leave you with an inevitability that there will be something transformative in your business, just like in 2007 this came along, and not everybody was ready for how it was going to change consumer behavior. There was the head of another company that was making smartphones at the time who was asked on television whether he saw this new thing called the iPhone as a threat, and he laughed.
$500? Fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
So I love Microsoft, but how did that work out, Steve Ballmer? Thank you for listening.
Thank you, David. I don't know about you guys. We were supposed to be inspired, right?
Or scared, depends.
Well, actually, I have to admit that it was a bit frightening at times.
No, I think.
So what about us normal people? I mean, everybody can't become a startup, right? I mean, we have what here? We have business owners, we have managers, we have IT managers, an occasional former prime minister. So how do we become startups, really? I mean, how do we survive in this environment?
No, I don't think you need to be scared. I think you need to see an opportunity to keep reinventing what you're doing and add new value. And I don't think you need to be a startup, but I think you can learn from that way of thinking. I think you can, I mean, we're in a battle now for talent. It's about getting the best people and motivating them. And if you can get your internal team feeling they are on a mission and thinking in a creative way about, well, let's question what we've been doing and where the changing value is of this customer, getting them help you reinvent the chance to get new revenue sources. I think the smartest banks are probably those building the companies that will eat the banks. I think business as usual is not going to work.
So business as usual is just not an option. That's what you're telling us. For no one.
Think of motoring. You know, if you're one of the big car companies, if all you're thinking about is better engine performance, better design, better luxury music products, that's like the deck chairs on the Titanic, when there's a whole radically different approach to transportation happening with, you know, hyperloops and autonomous vehicles and people not wanting to buy a car because they will just want access to the network of movement through a city. Do you carry on where the profit is, where your shareholders want quarterly updates on your revenue, or do you step back and think, okay, let's build the company that becomes what we will be? I think it has to be the latter.
Okay. Well, I do not want to dwell on the risks, but some of the people here in the room, well,
right.
ladies, would you like to take it from here?
You want to hear the update on my Slido challenge and stuff? Apparently, we have a bit of a problem with the internet connection. I mean, we're a technology conference, you know.
It's a good conference. You can tell how successful a tech conference is in inverse proportion to how available internet is. So this would be a really good one.
And, you know, we, by those standards, we hopefully will get very unsuccessful towards the later part of the day. However, some of you have managed to log on. We're trying to... So the story is that, as you may have found out, we have a very bad data connection here from the mobile network, and our Wi-Fi routers have crashed. So they're trying to do whatever they can in order to reload them, and hopefully they will be on. Some of you have better phones, I suppose, than others. So there are a couple of questions coming in. I mean, as you can see, this is a good thing, the Slido, if it works, right? If it works. Hopefully, by the end of the day, it does. So, but I kind of like this question that has gotten 9 votes. So, what is your attitude to the fact that technological expansion is leading us away from our biological nature? I mean, not sure what the biological nature is really, but I think it's very relevant. I have this constant struggle with my wife about how to raise our kids, and at what age, I mean, should we expose them to all of those technological gadgets and stuff, because it obviously creates a different psychological environment, different psychological makeup of who we are as persons. So what is your take on this?
I'm a big fan of traditional human means of mating and reproduction, so I don't think that's going to go away. But I think that collectively we need to discuss among ourselves the extent to which we want the tools to help us and how we provide some private space. So I personally would love to be constantly connected with my smart toilet that's monitoring my health, because life expectancy in the last century, typically in Europe, has gone up from 40 to 70 or 80, and that's because of technology. And I think it's going to go up considerably more if you can spot when there's a nutritional problem, when there's a heart problem in advance. The question is, should there be an expectation that you are always active on the network, and who owns your interactions with that network? Is there a company that is selling data that you don't realize you're giving the network? Is it using that data to your personal disadvantage? My spy friend knows that if I choose not to be on the network, if I choose to turn my phone off,
you're doing something.
I'm an extra risk.
Oh, yes.
So they will actively put resources towards tracking me. We haven't solved this. I think we need to fight for human zones. I'm very unhappy that airplanes are now starting to have Wi-Fi, because that has been one of the last places I can sit and think and read. And now my colleagues think they can get hold of me.
Right. Good. Any questions from the audience, by the way? Because the Slido thing did not really function for this session. Anyone wants to jump in? We actually have a couple of microphones, if anyone wants to ask. If you're... No? No? No?
While we were at it, actually, there was a question before which had a few votes.
How are we feeling today?
The privacy thing.
Oh, right.
The privacy thing. So, how about that?
Can we put it back?
Can we opt out? Do you see a way of us opting out from this? I mean, people sharing my credit card data the first time I enter it, and it's a bit scary.
So I've got two big concerns. I'm a real optimist, and I think innovators are going to solve problems. I'm not worried about DeepMind AI taking over the world. I'm actually quite excited that DeepMind's AI will help develop new kind of medicines, new kind of scientific progress that humans can't do. But the two things that really worry me are what happens to us as a society where there's an expectation that somebody works hard should be able to pay their family's needs when suddenly whole areas of the economy no longer need people. And we'll catch up because those people will develop new skills, but there's going to be a time lag, there's going to be a gap, and that will create big social unrest. And my other concern is as capitalism tends to empower a smaller number of people at the top, technology-based capitalism empowers a small number of companies that have ever greater access to our lives, to the talent. They can buy other companies, they can inhibit competition. Right. And they can control our access to everything from life insurance to a mate to access to a job. And I don't think it's fair as a society that we allow these 4 or 5 companies such dominance over our increasingly data-mediated worlds. And their interests do not align with our interests. They're optimizing profits, and we're starting to see the regulators kind of try and rein them in. I think the regulators need to move much more quickly, and we need to have that public debate now to get the regulators to constrain what these companies can do. Right. Because these companies are more powerful than governments. You know, if one of these big tech companies decided we don't see ourselves based in one particular physical location and we want to create an air force to allow us to do what we want, you know, I guess they could.
So we're almost out of time. I mean, the Slido thing has begun to work. You see it is a useful tool, and hopefully we will have more questions, more votes for the other sessions as well. So please keep checking the internet connection, whether you can log on and contribute and participate in the discussion. And meanwhile, we say a large thank you to David for being here.
Thank you.
With a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening.